Hey everybody, today we're talking about Blue Beetle Metamorphosis. Hey everybody, welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host, Brent. Today we're talking about Blue Beetle Metamorphosis. This is the first volume in the New 52 series of Blue Beetle. So, we've gone through the original 2007, 2008 volume, right? Yeah, all of it here on the channel. We started with the book 1 and book 2 of Jaime Reyes that came out last year. And then I tracked down the older 2 trades that came after that. So we went through all the way through 1 through 36. And now in 2011, they launched the New 52, and Blue Beetle was part of their initial publishing line. So I was excited. Blue Beetle still had a comic series after his, I wonder if there was like a year gap, maybe 2 years, something like that, between 2007 or 8 when the original series started, 3 years, yeah. So there wasn't that long of a gap between when that series ended and we got a new volume here in the New 52. So if you're not familiar with the New 52, quick overview. DC relaunched their entire line in 2011. Everything started from scratch except for Batman and Green Lantern, and that's about it. So with that concept of being a new reader jumping on points, they took their newest character, who had a pretty good origin and story here in this volume, and rebooted him less than 5 years later, maybe 5 years later. And I get why they did that, because his origin is deeply tied into Infinite Crisis in terms of when he gets a scarab and who he encounters, Jaime Reyes. So they kind of change all that here. We have a new artist and a new writer. We have Tony Bedard doing the writing, Ig Guada doing the art. Fantastic art, by the way. The best thing I can say about this book, fantastic art. I was picking it up at the time digitally. When the New 52 came out, they said they were doing everything day and date digital, and that's when I made the shift to digital. I sold my comics shortly thereafter, all my single issues, and started getting into trades much later, because my iPad collection on my Comixology app is huge. It is humongous. But anyway, so I was getting all of this digital, and I was reading it month to month, and I was like, it's not bad. It's not too terrible, and I was a little bit removed from the original series and how great that was. So I was getting my fix. He was still a new character. I think at this point, maybe, I don't know if Brave and the Bold had started, so we had seen Jaime Reyes move into other media and kind of catch fire as the new cool character, things like that. But it was hopeful. I was hopeful that Jaime would find a new home and a new audience and just continue his adventures here. Unfortunately, this series was short-lived. It only lasted for 16 issues or something like that. We'll get into it with the next volume, which I'm starting to read now. But this is issues 1 through 6. And boy, it is way different from the original. It's not too different. It's just different in tone and feeling, and it feels a bit rushed. And it almost seems like Tony Bedard was looking at the Keith Giffen and John Rogers run, the original run a couple years prior to this, saying, what can I change to make myself different? And in making those changes, I think the concept suffers a little bit. The core of the character suffers a little bit, which makes sense why the New 52 Jaime Reyes never caught on, and we moved past that when we get to the Rebirth stuff, and even into the current run with Graduation Day and the new number 1 and all that came out this year with, who's the gentleman on art? Is it Robert Trujillo? Josh Trujillo and Adrian Gutierrez on art. Phenomenal book. Go pick it up, and we'll get to it later, right? I think we did an overview of it, but we haven't done a review. So we're talking about New 52 Blue Beetle. Ig Guada on the art, phenomenal. Love it. You got these Tyler Kirkham covers. I think they're pretty good. Much better than when Tyler Kirkham first broke onto the scene with the Civil War Spider-Man stuff is the first stuff that I saw. I'm sure he has earlier stuff, but that was like really scratchy, really liney. And then I feel like by 2011, yeah, that was 2007, Civil War. 2011, he had kind of refined his style a little bit, and it's much more acceptable here. So I like the Tyler Kirkham covers. But Ig Guada, I really dig it. It fits in line with the rest of the New 52 in terms of style. It's still very expressive though, but we're not quite at the anime stage yet that we get to with Adrian Gutierrez on the current Blue Beetle run, which I personally love. But this is in line with the rest of the New 52. Like if you looked at the New 52 art style as a whole, outside of, Ivan Reis on Aquaman and Greg Capullo on Batman, like if you're like, hey, show me Tony Daniel, and I showed you this, you might not be confused. If I said, hey, show me Brett Booth on Teen Titans, and I showed you this, you might not be confused. So I'm just saying it fits into that stylistically, even though individually, yeah, you could say, well, there's Tony Daniel, there's Brett Booth, they certainly have their ways of drawing their faces. And I'm not sure if Iguata has a particular face that he repeats a lot, the same way that other artists do, but he's certainly not lacking for detail and emotion. It's easy to read. His panel layouts are very well done. So there was nothing here in this book art-wise that was challenging, nor was there anything that was a standout saying oh man, this is great. It was all, I don't want to say serviceable, because I do like the art. I'm a fan of Iguata specifically because of this run. But there's just nothing here that's oh man, I need to buy that page, or I want to hang it on my wall or make it my phone wallpaper. It's good, but it's not memorable. Does that make sense? So I think that's the most bad thing I want to say about it, right? Because otherwise it's pretty solid, it's pretty good. And I think that's what carried me through the book. Tony Bedard as a writer, I think I haven't read a bunch of his stuff recently. I think the most stuff I've read of his ever was on Teen Titans after Infinite Crisis when Jeff Johns left. He took over that book. Sean McKeever took over that book in separate runs, but I think that's the most I've written him. So he was writing teen characters a little bit before this, and now he's writing teen characters again. And it's not bad. I think if this had been Jaime's origin story, like this has been his true first appearance, his true volume 1, it would have been fine, but there's no heart to it the way that there is in Keith Giffen and John Rogers' original run. And more credit probably to John Rogers in that than Keith Giffen, because he stuck through the book longer than Giffen did. Giffen only lasted a couple issues, I believe. But yeah, I mean, also too, you have Cully Hamner doing his art on that original run, Duncan Rouleau. There's a lot of cool stylistic stuff happening in this, and a lot of heart. And they just take their time. They're not focused on the one and done. They're not focused on doing a story for the trade, whereas that was pretty much the mandate here with the New 52. And I know I'm supposed to be reviewing this book, but I can't help but draw comparisons to the modern classic, in my opinion, of the Giffen, Rogers, and Hamner era, right? The original storyline. So it's of its time at the time, but it doesn't hold up in comparison to other stories, especially when you gave him a new origin 5 years later. There's no time, there's no catching on, there's no any room to grow in to give somebody a new origin, a new spin on something that people love because you have a great idea. The same way that Batman has so many cool kind of origin stories or origin adjacent. You have Batman Year One, you have Batman Begins, you have Batman the Night, right? Which Chip Zdarsky just wrote. That's a 10-issue series, and that's really cool. It's origin adjacent. It takes place of Batman training before. There's all these different layers with Batman's origin story that keep getting added to over time, and there just hasn't been enough time or enough track laid in terms of a train running, right, for Jaime Reyes' Blue Beetle to get that same effect when you have a new origin 5 or 6 years later from his original appearance. So that's the point I'm trying to make. So there's also seems a little cheap too, especially towards the end when they make Paco not the big bad, but something happens to Paco and Jaime has a way of solving it, and he turns into this guy in red whose name is Thorax, and then he's fighting Jaime in the last issue. And that's unfortunate because it just dismantles the entire Jaime, Brenda, Paco like triad that we had in the original run that was well beloved for those original readers, myself included. And the other thing that Tony Bedard does is he cheapens Paco's character a little bit. He makes him a gang member from right at the beginning, whereas, you know, he was just a kid in this volume, and he was involved with gangs, but he was trying to stay out of it. And in this one, no, he's just a straight-up gang member, even though he's still Jaime's friend. They both have feelings for Brenda, so it's trying to build this weird love triangle thing. She already knows her her aunt is kind of a bad girl, because her aunt lives across the border in Mexico. We're still in El Paso after all. And it's pretty clear that she's like involved with the cartel from the very beginning. So there's no like surprise when any of this goes awry. And so it just takes away a lot of it took all the things in that original run and plucked out the mystery, I guess, maybe because we had to move past it to get to maybe what Tony Bedard really wanted to do. But when you take all those things out, instead of having a brand new origin, which there are things that work here that I feel like are part of Jaime Reyes that you cannot skip. He's got to be from El Paso. He's got to have Paco and Brenda. He's got to have a family. All of that is still here, but it's moved past so quickly that it kind of cheapens it in this volume. And I didn't think about that until reading it recently for this review and you know, reading through my library here. I didn't think about that because at the time when I was reading it when it came out, I don't think I've went back and reread this since then. But at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think like, oh, all these thoughts. I was like, oh, it's okay, it's cool. You know, I'm happy Jaime's getting another series because I was a big fan of his. And I felt like the only one at the time, honestly. But there's just some things that you never establish real relationships with Paco, Brenda, his mom and dad, his little sister. You never establish relationships with them and really get to know them as characters in this first 6 issues, as opposed to the first couple of issues of the original run. So I think that's just a sacrifice that had to be made at the altar of moving past the origin. So I don't know. The other thing they're not doing is they're not making it a mystery as to what the Scarab is. It's alien from the very beginning. It's established really early on. And it talks, the biggest change is in like the first 12 issues in this original run, you just had this weird alien language showing up. And Jaime didn't know what it was. And now in this volume, he's speaking with Kajida, the Scarab, automatically. He knows the name of the Scarab from like the end of the first issue. So there's no surprise or anything like that. They're speaking the same language the entire time. So there's no mystery anymore to what the Scarab is. So that's gone. So I think that's what I'm saying is like, you know, if there were things that really, really worked in that original run, that their removal just doesn't work here when you're doing this kind of weird forced retelling of the origin. You know, I'm sure Tony Bedard would have loved to have skipped this. Maybe the mandate came down being like, no, you have to start with issue number 1 and the origin. And he had to just turn in something. And he did the best that he could. Unfortunately, it doesn't work all that well. Like I said, it's okay. It's not a terrible read. It's not the worst thing I've ever read. But it's certainly not as good as the original stuff. So, anyway, let's leave it at that. That's my review of Blue Beetle Metamorphosis, Volume 1 of the New 52. Volume 2 is totally different from anything else that we've read, so there will be no comparisons. It'll be judged on its own merits, I guess we'll say. I try to do it with this one, but man, it is hard when I love that original John Rogers run so much. So, apologies, Tony. Apologies, Iguata. You know, I gave you the best shake I could. The art's fantastic, and I don't think Tony Bedard did a bad job given what he had to do in this first 6 issues. Unfortunately, none of it stuck, and we'll talk about that in the review for the next volume. So thank you guys for watching. We'll let you know how this goes. Let me know what you think of Blue Beetle Metamorphosis down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time in the funny pages.